I'll show another application of making animations to a set number of beats. I made this text scrolling animation. Then I can move the clip over and scale it down. And I also added the shift glitch effect onto it. On the shift glitch, specifically I used frequency 0.47, vertical 0.96, horizontal 0.06, size 0.12. In order to make this animation, in Notepad, I typed out some text and tried to design it and format it so that it looked like a programming language. Then in Paint, I made a large window, something like this. Then I cropped it down. I set the background to black, and then made a large text box, pasted the text in, set the font size to 20, and the font style to Liberation Serif. And I saved this as a PNG. In Blender, I dragged in the PNG, and I hit 1 to go to front orthographic view, Shift A, and I added a plane. R to rotate X about the X-axis, 90 degrees. Then I brought this over, G to grab S, and then X to scale on the X-axis, Z to scale on the Z-axis, and I set it to about the same size as the image. Once I had that, then I went to the Shading tab, and I hit Shift A, Texture, Image Texture. Then I loaded in the PNG that I made, and I connected it to an emission shader so that the text would light up, and set this to the material output, and texture coordinate UV set to mapping. So this mapping, if I adjust, for example, the Y, it moves through the texture. But if it's set to a whole number, so 0, 1, 2, then it doesn't move if it's a whole number. Then I could animate it, for example, from 0 to 1, to have it move through one cycle of this scrolling texture. And I want the animation to be 32 beats long. I know that I'm rendering at 60 frames per second, and from what I went over in the other video, I know that 4 beats is going to be 120 frames. So 120 times 8 is 960. I set a keyframe, right click, insert keyframe. And if you go to the shading tab, by default, it doesn't have this animation tab. I went to this and then changed it to dope sheet. And you can make the animation in the dope sheet, or I set the keyframes in the dope sheet, and then after that I changed it to this action editor. Might also work to do the whole thing in the action editor. And right click the shield to save the animation. Anyways, so at the first frame, I keyframed 0 on the Y, and then at frame 960, I keyframed 1 on the Y. It's scrolling through the image, and I set the camera to orthographic. And then Click the camera view, set active object as camera. And I went to 1 to go to front orthographic view, align active camera to view. But then the camera was kind of off, so I had to adjust that GX to move it over. You can move it GY to move it more in. And on the camera with orthographic view, there is this setting to zoom the camera in and out. Once I had that set up, then to get to the background to opacity to transparent, I went to the compositing tab, render layers, going to luminance key, going to composite, and I checked this use nodes. Then you might have to hit F12 to render an image and render something out before it will do this. Here I went to compositor always. Once again, 60 frames per second. The end frames. The end is 1 less, because frame 1 and frame 960 are going to be the same. So to avoid having a duplicate frame, I set the end length as 1 less. Then the encoding and the codec are both still set at QuickTime animation. And I turned off these so that I don't have this other stuff on the grid in the render. Then I went to View, Viewport Render Animation, and it will save it in this directory. In Resolume Alley, I converted the file to the DXV format with the alpha channel, and I loaded it back into Resolume. On the video clip, I also lowered the opacity a bit, because if it was fully white at 100% opacity, it didn't look like it was blending that well with some of the other video clips. So here, and then set the opacity down.